after that, after you had totally formed the image of the things that you needed to forgive them for and the person, you would literally imagine them in this bubble fly into the sun and burst into flames, and then they were gone.
So in your visualization, you first drown this individual and then light them on fire.
Welcome to the step of transformation that has made me an eternal optimist. I was this prior, but I was this prior under a very unrealistic stance of what being an optimist is. Right?
Well, you were Optimism Prime, and that's good for you. So.
Optimism Prime. Can we make
that's actually a t-shirt idea, I feel like, right?
Yeah, except for it's Optimus Prime with my face on it.
Yeah, it's just
we not only want to be superheroes, I want to be a transformer as well.
So, you know what I mean? Hey, man, whatever you can transform into.
Dude,
that's what this whole thing is about, right?
Maybe if this thing gets big enough and like somebody goes back and listens to this, somebody actually makes me an action figure with my face on an Optimus Prime bot, and I transform into a dildo.
If our podcast even gets a fraction of the size of your ass, we'll be great. Don't worry about it. Well, we'll be so successful, we'll have so much money, we won't even.
Alright, so this really is my favorite. I don't know what to say. It's not favorite, but I mean, it is the reason for change. It is at this point, if you've gotten to this point in your own personal transformation, is at this point where you can start to move forward completely, and there's still a transitional phase of going through forgiving yourself, which is what we're going to talk about today with acceptance, and then also awareness and how that continues to transform and progress throughout your life, and it's an ongoing process as well.
For sure. I will say that this is by far the most fun step, right? Because when you get to this portion of it all, you have a pretty good idea of where you're at and where you want to go, and there's a sense of control in some form, or at the very least you can actually start making moves in a direction that you want. This one and learn, just because learn is one of my traits. I love learning new things, but this one for sure was definitely one of the more fun parts, because when you're going through this, when you need to go through this, it's usually a pretty dark time. So this is more of like the light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing. So it's like not like it's a victory lap, because you said it's ongoing, so it's a constant struggle for sure.
Yeah.
But it's definitely like, pat yourself on the back kind of situation for sure.
It's also scary.
Absolutely.
Scary, because now your fears, your irrational fears of the things like fear of judgment, or really fear of judgment is very irrational, even though it's rampant. And even like fear of success is kind of diluted now. And really, it's more like now I feel like I am meant for something, or I am in a place in my mind in which I can do whatever I want to do. And now fear of failure, or even what I like to call imposter syndrome, which is like I'm used to being a face, and this face said all the right things, but internally doing the right things was not in my cards at the time. And then now doing the right things and saying the right things, you still have to battle, like, who am I to do this?
You were actually dealing with that yesterday.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Still currently ongoing for everybody involved. I had the same thing when we started doing the pot thing. Like, still do for sure. Like, we don't have that settled in, and I'm like, oh, hey, I'm doing all these things, and I feel comfortable and confident. I know more than most people in that particular area, and totally lost. You know?
And I like, there's two different views on fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And, one view comes from Gary Vee, who we both follow and respect. And his is always like, you can't fake it and make it, like you're going to get weeded out at some point. And that's true, because it actually happened to me in a sense of going so far before, again, you're so disconnected from actions and intention that you are now fake, like it is there. But I do believe that, again, if any entrepreneur or any person, you don't have to be an entrepreneur that you want to just create something out of thin air, it's going to be a little bit fake in the beginning.
Well, for sure.
What is real is the vision, the dream, all these different things, but like starting to speak it into existence with no history of actually doing it is the fake part.
Well, I mean, the initial inertia is is when the fake is needed.
Yeah.
Just to get up and moving, right? As you start moving, realistically, if you're doing something for 8 hours a day, 4 hours a day, however many hours a day for an elongated period of time, realistically, you should get relatively good at whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, the fake it no longer applies because you're learning as you go, hopefully.
Yeah, and learning becomes a lot easier when you're passionate about something.
Absolutely.
And it definitely will drive your growth. So, as we get into today, which is the A squared, and I will not attempt to spell alpha again, it's acceptance and awareness. Acceptance and awareness. So we want to start with acceptance. And honestly, in Learn and Liberate, in issue number 3, we talked about Learn and Liberate. And Liberate was the first part of, or beginning step of starting to forgive yourself, starting to separate your former self from who you currently are trying to build into. And at this point, no matter how long the process has taken for you to get to where you are now, now we need to really accept and forgive ourselves. And we do that, or I did that, through a couple of different visualizations that I want to share. The first one is this is a forgiveness visualization. And with human beings, there is something with fire that is very impactful for us.
Sure, it's cleansing.
Yes, it really is. I mean, even in old, they used to burn witches at the stake, cleansing.
Sometimes you just got to get them out of there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Those witches. But
damn witches.
But I hate to say it, in a way of like representation of what that meant of watching. We're getting back into the old times. A witch burned at the stake. People that watched it believed that this, not only that their body was burned, but this internal demon that they were was burned with them. So fire being something that's very impactful for human beings. What I did, and I got this from, and I do not know the source, but it was on Spotify, in which was a 7-step forgiveness visualization, is that you imagine the things that you need to forgive yourself for, whether it's compartmentalized or whether it's even a person, anything else, you imagine them in your brain, in meditation, being in a bubble. Okay, and if the person is in a bubble, and inside of that bubble, there's also bags. So there's like a brown paper bag. And what you would do is if the person needs to be forgived, you would then also put the person with this brown paper bag, all the things that person specifically did to you into this brown paper bag. Don't know the significance of the brown paper bag, except for it's a bag to hold something. After that, after you had totally formed the image of the things that you needed to forgive them for and the person, you would literally imagine them in this bubble fly into the sun and burst into flames, and then they were gone.
So in your visualization, you first drown this individual and then light them on fire.
Drowning, it's air, you know what I mean? So it's actually very gentle.
So
it's very gentle, and then instant death.
Right, so you only throw her into the sun. So you want to know what? That's less bad, I guess, in that regard, for sure.
We're pampering the body to be cremated.
Right. We have so many good things here.
So really, so what you have to do for yourself, again, this is a person, and if we're taking the blame aspect out of it, yes, people do bad things to other people, and that happens, but we're internalizing at this point. So for yourself, you don't want to throw yourself into the fire, but you do inside of this bubble bag, and then, now that I've talked through it, brown paper baggage, right? So that's what it represents. You put everything inside of there that maybe you have still been beating yourself up over, everything that you dislike, quote unquote, about yourself into this bag. And then again, once you have conceptualized and visualized all of the things, throwing it into the sun and bursting into flames. And when I did it after my transcendental meditation, and then I listened. This was a guided meditation, so listening to it definitely helped. I instantly felt any sort of tightness or anxiousness feeling just like dissipated. Now, it came back the next day.
It's a concept, right? You know what I mean? It's like motivation and showering. It's required daily. Got it.
So that was one of the most impactful visualizations that I learned through this process.
That is I gotta say, I would never do that. That sounds way too complicated. I wouldn't be able to hold all the, you know what I mean? I'd have too much fun watching the person burn, all kind of weird stuff, because, you know, hey, it gets dark in there. All the stuff I did was all action based, because I externalized everything, so I put it out to the world. So for mine, the biggest one was actually when I volunteered. I volunteered at a middle school, one of the middle schools, and voluntold. When you're in the military, there's not really an option. So it's like, hey, we need volunteers. Oh, no one signed up? You're new, go. But it's actually really, really good. I actually ended up doing a toy drive after that, and I volunteered a few more times afterwards. But I had we went to go like color with these like little middle school kids and stuff, and it was a really good experience. Like putting myself out there, giving my time to somebody else that needed it, and attempting to help in whatever way that I could. And I think the actual act of helping, if you do it consistently enough, because it's so rewarding, it can become an addiction in and of itself, right? Sure. And that actually, I have to believe, just because of how it impacted me, will actually physically change your neurochemistry, because it pulls your instinct out of yourself, and it allows you to really see what impact you can have on other people, and even the small acts of kindness can profoundly change their day, right? Sure. And that is the start of changing their life, right? It's a day at a time. So,
yeah. And coincidentally, it was the start of changing yours.
Right. And but you don't hindsight, right? Yes. You don't realize that in the moment. So
your origin story becoming a super giver. Helping kids color. It's a small gesture, but it means a lot to them.
Yeah. Right. So. Yeah, I know, and it was a really good time for me. So after that, we did a toy drive. I volunteered at a few more events. I can't pull them out of my head right now. But then after that, moved to Washington, and then I met people there. I would actively seek out, because I tried volunteering when I got here. I actually got fired from a volunteer opportunity when I got here. I tried to volunteer at a hospital. Went through the whole process, and they told me I couldn't work there unless I was going to wear long sleeves because of my tattoos.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going to hide who I am, so I'm not going to do this.
Oh, okay. So they were... Actually, I remember you telling me this, actually, that they were still stuck.
I was trying to volunteer at a children's hospital. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I went through the whole Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Yes,
not
it
to
is.
The conversation.
Society.
Yes. Makes no sense. I'm trying to give away my time to help kids.
But because you have tattoos, you can't.
That's all I got for that one. And it was old white men of America, let's go. Mm-hmm. Just holding on to those ideals, right?
Yeah.
But I would highly recommend, if visualization, because some people, I have a really hard time with doing all the things that you do in that regard, right?
Well, and this is the difference between us.
Right.
I internalize and you
externalize, right? So if your natural reaction as a whole is to put it on someone else instead of on yourself, then odds are you probably need to get out into the world and do something in that regard.
Yeah, I attached myself to one thing that you were saying, which was addiction and shifting your addiction to things that brought you joy, that actually also stimulated a dopamine response in your brain, but it was not coming from a chemical or not a chemical. We say a chemical, I mean drugs. Even painful experiences, because unfortunately we are addicted to pain as well. Human beings are.
Sure. We're bodybuilders. We're definitely addicted to pain. We're all masochists.
Yeah. Again, for some reason, if I get a pump at the gym, it releases dopamine. So physical pain actually brings me pleasure, which can definitely stimulate a couple of doors opening throughout that. But it was something that I identified with, because that is a realization that I had when I was doing producing the plan and the healthy habits. For instance, when you do transcendental meditation, it releases 60% of your dopamine storage throughout your body once you're done with the meditation. So it literally is an uplifting activity. Working out, which is something I continue to do, but working out, doing cardio will stimulate dopamine production and serotonin to be released into your body. Eating certain foods, there's the food-mood connection. So during this process, and we haven't discussed this, but I kept my diet as healthy as possible knowing that there were certain foods in omega-3 fatty acids that would stimulate dopamine production. So I literally looked up a diet for anxiety, and a part of that was walnuts. It was great for anxiety. Extra virgin olive oil,
all the fats,
avocado, and this comes from the Mediterranean diet, which is a very popular diet that therapists will recommend for people that have chronic depression.
So comparatively to all the other things that you just described to help with your acceptance, which one was the most impactful? The diet, the visualization? I mean, they all played a part. I got it.
Yes.
And which one did you notice the greatest uptick in moving forward?
Well, meditation has been the most impactful thing that I've brought into my being that will never leave. And there's a lot of different things that I have thought were a good idea that I no longer do. And given the fact that working out was already something I was doing prior, during my former self, meditation was the first thing that it was the catalyst for change. It was realizing, connecting to my subconscious, connecting to my soul, and realizing that it was there. And then with that realization, coming out of it, feeling so good about it, and realizing how good I felt. And I will save, when we talk about an issue for transcendental meditation, I'll save my actual story for then, but it was just such a joyful feeling coming out of the first meditation that it was childlike joy. I haven't felt that, especially during a time which was very painful for me.
Well, the dopamine creates a sense of euphoria, I would imagine.
It does, but also I don't know if there's any scientific credence to this, but I feel like if you find a different way to stimulate dopamine production that you've never done before, almost like taking a drug for the first time.
Well, no, I would absolutely.
Again,
I haven't done any research on that, and that totally makes absolute sense.
So it was just, it was a way that I could feel that I didn't know I could feel anymore without the use of a substance. So at the time, if I was using MDMA or ecstasy to feel happy, to feel this euphoric feeling, I was attached and dependent on, at one point, dependent on it to make me happy, to make me have a good time when I was going out. And the fact that in an instance of doing something that had nothing to do with substance, had everything to do with me and my being and who I was and connecting to this source, is what still stimulated that realization shifted me greatly.
Well, I mean, it's profound, and realistically,
profound is a great word.
Well, yeah, no, and realistically, it's the most profound thing too, because it lets you know unequivocally, without question, that you can maintain that just on your own without anything else, right? For me, that was actually my sister that actually told me that when I was going through a few things with a lot of other people. I had a very visceral reaction to one person, and I felt like whole and complete through and through, just very quickly, like one of those people that you have like part of our soul group, or however you want to call it. You have a very strong energetic connection to. And one of the things that allowed me to move through when we separated was, she said, you can feel that way on your own, right? You don't need people, you don't need another person to be a whole person. They just accelerate the process.
Yeah.
Right? So like, I can feel joy on my own, and when I'm with you, it just gets amplified, right? Yeah. But it exists within me regardless of whether or not you were there.
Yeah, which is great because you're giving your input on the topic that I was discussing in the prior issues, which is like you can cultivate anything, and we might cultivate it differently, but how we do it, and again, you are cultivating with external and internal, but it can be cultivated. You just need to know the vehicle that will make that happen for you, and it can't be another person because then
that's codependency. That's where codependency comes from.
And again, once you use another person to feel a certain thing.
It
doesn't matter how great you feel in that present moment, you've already set the tone and the demise of the relationship with that person. Just my opinion based off of what I've seen in my life and in other people's lives.
Well, I mean, maybe not. Maybe you just die together and then you stay codependent forever.
There are plenty of people that do that. I imagine that their ability to be happy has then been diluted because they're dependent on somebody else to make them happy. And once you become dependent on that, you realize that you can't be happy without getting out.
Fair enough.
But if you decide that the social construct of our society tells you have to stay married, you're probably never going to be happy.
I bet you the older generations that's probably went rampant. Like if we went to I would imagine that's probably rampant everywhere in there.
Well, even my parents, they got divorced after 30 years of marriage, so we knew.
How many of them were happy?
Well, again, me and my sister, we knew without knowing, but we knew,
Right.
by the time I was in high school and she was in middle school, that this separation of their energetic separation was pretty prevalent and present. And we kind of had the feeling that they were together just for us. And then
That makes it so much worse.
Lo and behold, once my sister graduated college,
They split.
that was it, right? So, I have the example in my own family, and I also see the example, amongst older people that just don't appear to be happy with each other. And I've also seen the opposite, though. I've seen a lot of old people as well that, man, they are just like still into each other. They're helping each other get up steps and stuff like that. They're still very much there for each other. So, I don't want to generalize everybody. Everybody's different, but I've seen both sides of the coin, and it's just very unfortunate to see two people with an idealistic view of being together for the rest of their lives and then forcing themselves to be together for the rest of their lives.
Well, I mean, and it depends. I mean, for me personally, I can't imagine why you would sit there and put yourself in that scenario, right? Why would you choose to sit in something that is inevitably toxic? I mean, it's your life, right? So do what you want.
Well, you've achieved awareness, right? So I would say that these people are not self-aware, or they're not self-aware, or they aren't aware of the information that they had access to change their thought process. Again, social construct. They are living within the bubble that the society created, and inside of that bubble, they don't feel like anything can be changed. So they live.
So why
within
try?
the bubble.
Right.
Exactly. Awareness, and a step of awareness is learning. And bringing in new information that isn't in your bubble so that you can expand your thought process so that you can come into your true self and understand that through the new information that you've always known was missing in your life.
All right. So target audience is old people.
Yes. If anybody, well, yeah, I mean, that, and I was speaking in front of old people convincing them to walk.
That's so funny. That's actually true. Yeah.
So actually, target audience is everybody. I think we found this out, even in the very first issue that you said, I would like to think this is for everybody, but nothing is. But when you say that, it feels so right to me that it is for everybody.
I mean,
it's just whether they're willing to listen.
Well, amen to that. I mean, realistically, listen and then apply.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, you can hear this and that's great. And that's hopefully, you get the feels good type stuff. Like when you listen to Gary Vee and his business advice and it's like, oh, I got the feels good. I did something productive. And then you don't apply anything that you learned. It's like, well, that realistically was just a waste of time at that point in time. So take the steps, get the inertia. You can do it. Believe in yourself. All that jazz.
So I'm going to lead our rabbit back to what we were speaking about.
Sure, for sure.
which was also just, as a former addict, basically what we were talking about was shifting the dopamine response to healthy habits, things that are going to make you feel good, and giving is definitely one of those things. So once you feel as if you have something to give to others and you start giving, again, just amplifying, and then eventually the way that you used to view, for myself, the way I used to view pornography or drugs or anything like that, now it's more like, let me separate the two for a second. Pornography, I still view it in a very negative light because of what it did, and I still believe that it does dilute your ability to connect with another individual, especially somebody you love. So that is the truth in that regard for me. It's my truth.
Yep.
But for drugs, now I can see them as not something I need, rather than it's something that I can use if I want to, and that's changed my experiences when I do it. Actually made it better, right? So I want to go over one more tactic or method that I used. I used something called God boxing, and God boxing, going back to the fire, and again, human beings seeing fire, was also a very impactful exercise that I did, in which you write down, something. For me, it was like, I am unworthy of success. I am unworthy of love. I should always be alone. These are things that were rampant, thoughts in my head that I knew were attached to my old self, and they were still digging in me sometimes, and even more so, an instance would come up that would reinforce that belief, whether it was another failed relationship, or whether there was a failed relationship and I was dating somebody new, and inside of dating somebody new, I would still be bringing in these thoughts, and it would keep distance from that person.
Yeah.
So God boxing requires writing it down on paper, having a candle in front of you, writing it down, and burning the paper in front of you and watching it burn. And it has the very similar effect of the visualization. You talk about something that you can do externally that you can actually see
it happening.
Yeah, same thing. Do it. I woke up the next day. I did like 5 different statements, and I woke up the next day, and it was very peaceful to wake up. And normally my anxiety is higher in the morning. I wake up with a little bit of anxiety about the day, about different things, and I feel like if you're anxious about something you want to do that day or something that's coming, that could feed into other thoughts that cause anxiousness, and it was happening that way for me. It was like a branch.
And then you're manifesting all those things happening.
Yeah. So I woke up the next day, and that wasn't there for the first time, and that was really impactful for me too.
Yeah. Before we get to awareness, though, I would like to say that these are the things that we did, and this is something somebody said to me once, and I'd never actually thought about it before. But you need to actually be creative about forgiveness. Which is like I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, but it's a weird sentence to say, I feel like.
Yeah.
So you need to find, like, this is a creative way to do something. So if this doesn't work for you, just think about how you process things, how you internalize things or externalize things, and then try to find a way to mirror that behavior on the opposing end, right? So whatever that is for you, whatever your issue is, try to find not the exact opposite, but something that mirrors it in kind, but is a kinder, more gentle, more compassionate version of that, and then try doing that and see if that helps alleviate whatever it is that you're dealing with.
And I think that coming to this step, that if you have achieved a level of awareness and knowing yourself, you would actually know what would work for you.
Sure.
If you really sat down and thought about, okay, for instance, I have a rebel mentality. I don't, but I know people that are like that. This guy sitting across from me, again, difference. If I tell Sonny, you can't do something, that would stimulate motivation for you to prove me wrong and show me what to do. So if you have a rebel type of mentality, maybe writing stuff down against yourself, like, you ain't gonna do that. You know what I mean? But knowing that it's coming from a place of motivation, and maybe that's what you need to actually write down and burn if you want to do God boxing. For me, I'm unworthy. For you, it might be, you were never worthy. This was never going to be happening for you. You know what I mean? And that could stimulate because the same result, which is what we're looking for.
Well, and it's funny too because people would perceive those statements as negative, right? So it's like and I don't like those. You know what I mean?
Emotion is you don't like the label.
An emotion is an emotion. It's neither negative nor positive. I mean, do you want to be more joyful and less anxious? Yeah, probably. But balance. Yeah. One law. It's the one truth that can't be. You can't outdo it. You can't outthink it. You can't outsmart it. It comes back for everybody. So I feel like you can use whatever emotion that you need to get yourself where you're going if you're creative enough about it. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. So forgiveness is an ongoing process, and I think it's an ongoing process not only for the certain things that maybe you've moved past now, but then realizing that you're going to have to forgive yourself eventually. Again, even with this level of awareness, you're going to fuck up.
You're human.
You're going to have to forgive somebody. You know what I mean? So, like, at least if you've gone through this process, now you have some tools that that works for you that might be able to expedite that process in the future.
Right. All this stuff, realistically, like we were talking about earlier, the reprogram, everything, it's not that you're not going to screw up, not going to make mistakes. It's just you rebound faster each time. It's just it's a quicker response time.
Just to share a brief story about a former thing that would really get me, and something that still got me recently, but it didn't get me at the same level, would be when a client leaves, right? And you feel like you've given, or I'll stop talking about in essence of you. I felt like I gave everything that I could to this certain client, and that client left. And in the past, it drove resentment. It did. And I would even say things like, well, they're just being influenced and FOMO and da-da-da-da. But I said it in a way in which, like, it was only me. It was very egotistically driven.
How could they leave me? All my glory.
And all the things that I've done for them.
And all this booty meat.
And I would stew. And unfortunately, there's these clients that ended up leaving, I still have some contact with. And there's an energy that was created from that can never be rekindled. It just doesn't matter, because the leftover energy is what was felt about that situation. And I've tried, and I even seriously tried, and then it was squashed, and then 3 days later the energy was still there. It couldn't be forgiven completely because of my reaction, how I internalized it. Now, coming through, the same situation happened recently, and it hurt initially, but this is, even though I'm talking about it now, this is the first time it's popped into my mind in a few days at this point. You know, it's like I got over it in a couple days. I was like, all right, whatever, move on with your life. You know. And
well, I mean, if you did everything, realistically, if you do everything that you can for somebody, and you know that you did, and that you gave it your best effort, and they still leave, I mean, maybe it's because of the result you produced. That's certainly a possibility. And, I mean, odds are, I mean, it might just be on them, right? So, at that point in time, you could sit there and try to pick apart, evaluate all the different whatever, and that's a huge waste of gray matter.
Well, two things that I learned that through this process that helped me to now deal with this situation better. One, in the 4 agreements written by Don Miguel Jimenez. Number 2 is that everybody is doing the best they can in this life. You know, so essentially, like, you can't force your best on somebody else's best, and you also have to realize that they're own person and they're just trying to do the best they can. And if you can say that, you know, whether it's you leaving me or not, you're trying to do the best you can. This is your best right now. Your best might be better later. Matter of fact, it should be better later in a different sense of how you handle a certain situation. But this is the best you can do right now. And I've done everything I can for you to bring you to this point, and at this point, you're going to have to figure it out.
I mean, so I'm guessing this book was written by another optimist, I would imagine.
Eternal optimist.
As soon as you said that, I said, oh, buddy, no.
Well, number 1 is be impeccable with your word, which can go all the way through, again, admit and honesty. And,
that is the foundation. Well, I mean, so there's literally nothing more important than communication across the board. Makes a difference. Like, everything that you see around you, every construct, every cell phone, everything that's not naturally grown started as a conversation for some form of communication at some point in time, right? So if your word is all you have, it doesn't matter how rich you get, doesn't matter how much influence you create. If you stop being genuine to what you say you're going to do, eventually people will stop doing things for you because they can't trust what you're going to say. It's fundamental.
Yeah, no, I've been there. So the other thing that I did was in a float pod, which is really cool. They have these float spas.
The salt?
Yeah.
The salt? I've done those.
It's a saline solution. You get to float. I don't float in any body of water except for I found out the Dead Sea, which everybody floats in. But yeah, so like it's a pod. You're in there for an hour. And what started happening during my transformation is every single time I went to one, during my meditation, because I would do transcendental inside of there, I would go in with either an actual intentional thing that I wanted to work out, or I would go in knowing subconsciously that there's something bothering me and an answer would come. So this one instance, I went in intentionally with the question, how do you get rid of resentment? I don't want to be resentful anymore, and the result is the manifestation of this podcast, because once I was in my meditation and I asked the question, and when you ask the question of the universe or God, and you can do this if you follow a Christian or religious text or anything like that, I found that this is the best way to ask a question of your deity or the universal source. What would it take? Because by asking it in a sense of what would it take to get rid of resentment, it's very open-ended and it's action-driven. There's going to be something in it. If you say, how do I get rid of resentment? You can still spin your tires with that because it doesn't actually focus your question or your answer. It doesn't focus your answer on what actions would take for that to happen, right? So by saying, what would it take to get rid of resentment? And then I sat quietly for about 2 minutes. And the answer came to me. It was to give without expecting anything in return, and that giving is your return. If you always give and you don't expect anything back, and the giving is what brings you happiness and brings you joy, it doesn't matter who you give to at what different time, resentment will not set in because you've already got the fulfillment just from giving.
Okay, eternal pessimist here.
Yeah, I know.
And that's a quick, fast, fundamental way to get yourself taken advantage of real quick, fast, and in a hurry.
Yes, I know that. I'm talking about in the spiritual sense of how you internalize, not necessarily what you're going to do with the physical world. Do I still deal with resentment? Is it gone? No, it still sits in. But again, that thought allows me to not become resentful over time, which is corrosive, rather than noticing the resentment in the moment and then saying these two things that I've put around it, like what we talked about recently. You need to say something, you need to conceptualize or manifest a statement that'll help you move past whatever it is that's bothering you.
Wouldn't a change in perspective be just as efficient and significantly less impactful in terms of like detriment to like being taken advantage of? So for example, if you're resentful about something, depending on what it is, obviously I don't know that there's gonna be like one blanket, case scenario to fix all, but if you change how you perceive it, like, so if you're resentful of the situation that you've had, or if you're resentful for the things that have happened to you, or your starting point because you were poor or whatever it might be, and you don't like where you're at right now, the easiest way for in my head to get over it is, okay, do you like who you are in this moment? And if the answer is no, then what do I need to do to become somebody that I do like? And then work your way towards there. And then once you become somebody that you do like, you can sit there and say, okay, am I resentful? No, realistically you can't be. Because if you have the right perspective, all those negative things were required to happen to create you. Therefore, you should be grateful for them if you like who you are.
Well, that's gratitude changed the perspective, but also that changed my perspective on giving, though, because not that I hadn't ever put words to giving. It was always just something that I did. I was a people pleaser. I was a giver. I'm a coach. I just escalated into my position of what I do, so naturally I give. But I had never put in, it was a feeling, it wasn't verbalized. So verbalizing the feeling was a shift in my perception of giving. Now I sit there and I've realized that over time that's what I was doing. I was giving and I never expected anything back. If somebody was like, oh man, let me do something for you, I'd be like, no man, you're good. Like, I just want to do this for you. And eventually it would come back, and because the people that would bring it back to me, I wouldn't notice resentment because it was coming back to me. The only time I would notice is just that I continued to give and give and give. So I wanted to get rid of it. Again, the change in perspective was give without expecting anything in return and get the fulfillment from giving. And once I had that ingrained, once I left the float and I had that ingrained, it's allowed me to deal with situations in which resentment can rise faster and move past it faster.
Okay, so then how do you maintain the giving without also not getting taken advantage of?
Well, we've discussed that plenty, and I think in the same way, and I'm actually just coming to a connection through this conversation, that what we did yesterday with the mastermind is that we are all giving to each other without setting any sort of standards or parameters about what to give and what value is on that gift, right? And that is what I think you have to do, especially when it comes to business. We're talking about taking advantage of. Business would definitely have that happen if there is nothing set in stone on here's what I'm giving,
right.
Here's a product I'm selling, it's worth this much. It's the same thing. Here's the service I'm providing, it's worth this much. And if you don't put that into paper and again put words to the giving, then yeah, taking advantage of is definitely going to happen.
I guess part of it feeds into the awareness bit for sure, right? That would be the answer to the question ultimately. If you're aware of who you are as a person and what you're giving to somebody else, I mean, there's got to be a line in the sand somewhere.
And that is a level of what we're about to discuss, which is micro awareness. Like prior, I wouldn't be aware of this one situation in which I needed to fix, and now because I have changed my perception about this one situation, it allows me to take what I've learned and apply it in different areas so that I, one, protect myself, and two, continue to give without resentment setting in, or if it does set in, have it so that it's only temporary. And really, if I'm thinking about the example that I was just talking about with the clientele, I didn't have anything set with those clients. That was on paper. I didn't have a contract. I didn't have anything. A contract is a great way to make sure that resentment doesn't come into place, right?
Yep, for sure.
I didn't have that with those two. I didn't have anything verbalized into my giving. And now verbalizing or putting words to on paper, whatever else, is the protection.
When did you first notice? Was there a moment? I mean, obviously it happens over time, but when did you realize that you were aware, I guess, would be the way to phrase that? Or when did you feel like you had a firm grasp on?
Well, I think so if you're going through this transformational process, typically it's not one gap. Typically it's multiple
it's-
gaps, right? So having standards like, or moments like what I just described in the micro awareness to be able to have different situations that you in your past would have reacted a certain way, and now in your future you react differently because of the awareness of what the result was of how you acted prior. Another good example, I'm dating a girl that I care about very much. We were in the car yesterday and I got into an egotistical rant.
Selfish.
Yes. Not rant. I mean, I was doing what I do on this podcast. I was just talking a lot. And it was all about things that I cared about, which makes it egotistical. And I didn't even give her time to chime in on her own thoughts about what I was saying. I was so much in that. And she brought it to my attention afterwards, and it was after I had noticed that her emotional state had changed. And I started to feel as if already that I had done something wrong, and prior to, I would have been like, I've done something wrong, but I don't know what it is. You know what I mean? So the awareness was, oh shit, I just sat there and talked for an hour and a half in a car and she didn't say anything. She probably feels kind of insignificant at this point. And that was how she felt. So the fact that I had this new awareness when prior I would be like, I don't know why you're feeling that way. I was just, trying to tell you what I was feeling, is a micro awareness that I've brought into a different situation. And I would say that awareness in a sense of the micro, I can think off cuff of different small issues or times, in which like I have now seen a change in my behavior, but I don't think I've even tapped into all of them yet. I think different situations are going to arise that I've subconsciously locked some sort of pain or some sort of way in which I didn't respond, and it'll come back into there because now I'm aware of it, and then again I know how to respond differently. I don't know if it's going to be the correct way, but it's going to be a more genuine way to me.
Right. So I mean, it's ever evolving, right?
Yeah.
It's constant because you're finding new things out about yourself, hopefully every day. And I believe that as you begin to grow and you learn new talents, I mean, that learning new things actually rewires your brain. So it would make sense that as that starts to happen, that realistically you have access to a whole new breadth of just neurons and all the different things that come along with that realistically is going to shift what awareness looks like for you drastically, like so utterly drastically that you might not even recognize yourself, 5-10 years from now. Hopefully 10 years from now you look back at yourself and you said, oh, I thought I knew what awareness was, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Hopefully that's the kind of progress that you're continually making. For me, it was identifying the voices in my head. So I believe in epigenetics, which is the transfer of memories. Like my uncle talks about this at length, and I've read a few things here and there, and I'm definitely not an expert by any means, but I think it's very cool, the belief that, or the understanding from science that you can actually transfer things from the parent to the child that aren't just genetic.
Yeah. Right?
They're emotional standpoint. So like when you meet a mother and a daughter, and the daughter's like, I'm controlling, my mother's controlling, it's just a family thing.
Yeah.
I probably sent from one person way long ago, and nobody's bothered to do the work to get rid of this thing. So now sometimes I swear I can hear my parents' voices in my head. Swear. Like, and I hear what they're saying. Usually if it's my mother, it's usually something loving and nurturing. So it's like I can start to identify the tone. It's a very weird, very odd thing when I started to begin to notice it. And when that started to happen, I was like, oh shit. It made it a lot easier to identify, okay, what's really mine and what's not, kind of thing.
They've identified it. Like I'm talking about a group of people. It's been identified as a generational curse.
Yes.
Generational curses, things
this
that
is the family trait.
Exactly, yeah. It's just, it runs in the family.
We're all loud.
Yeah, and I identify with that, man. Again, my father, anxiety is definitely at its peak when we travel, definitely has OCD tendencies. I was in the middle of saying something that's actually very negative towards him, but it was more fear for me, and I was like, I don't want to end up like my father in some of the ways that he would react, in relationships and love and stuff like that. And by saying it with that way, guess what happened? There was a lot of ways in which I reacted because I knew it was there, but also the other thing that I realized through saying that statement was that, again, my father is not a bad man. He's actually a very good man. The difference between, I think, us fundamentally at this point is the awareness aspect of this, and his level of awareness, and even talking to him recently, was his level of awareness is, I have been in this brain for 65 years. I know myself and this is who I am, right? I'm
Well,
not.
if you make the
it's-
decision,
it's too late
absolutely.
to change. That
Right.
is his level of awareness, and it's different from mine. Mine is, okay, I'm aware that if I don't change certain aspects of me, that I will not become the person that I want to become, rather than being attached to, I don't want to be my father, which was a very bad, honestly, it's a bad thing to say about somebody who loves me very dearly, and how he's interacted in his life. It's just his choices. And I have different choices to make, and I can break away from that ancestral curse.
Right. Well, so I mean, you can just change the verbiage. It's not that you don't want to be like your father. It's you don't want to have the same demons as your father.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's the same. It's not that you don't like. I mean, just change the verbiage. Not to throw you a curveball, but I'm curious because I asked the opposite question. So what's been the greatest benefit since you've been aware?
Aware, happiness. That would be the best thing I think that's happened from all of this, is that even through the stress, even through everything that we're trying to do, everything that I'm trying to be, that causes a new level, a new type of anxiety, or I wouldn't say new type, new vehicles for the anxiety.
And intensity, for sure.
It's way more manageable, because overall, I wake up happy. And to come from a place where, I mean, you've seen me, at a very low spot where, like, I didn't think I would ever get out of the depression that I was feeling. And I even still can battle temporarily bouts of depression. I battled it recently, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago, where like I just had a few days where I was like, dang, it's hard to get out of this right now. But because of this overwhelming new sense of awareness, I did get out of it. I got out of it a lot faster than normally it would stew for weeks.
Yeah.
And also being aware of my emotional energy and how I can very much uplift people. I can very much be a black hole too, and being aware of that ability to really bring people down into how dark and deep I can get. That level of awareness keeps me from going that route, but also I also have the tools of thought building and recoding to make sure that I don't get to that point.
Well, and I'm assuming that also helps pull you out, right? Because it's like, well, if I'm going to feel like this, and then I'm going to have all these people that I love over, this is how I'm going to make them feel.
Yeah.
And it's a lot, for me, it's always been easier to do things for other people than it is for myself, right?
Like what we discussed, I had to shift out of being in a kind of a low level frequency prior to the mastermind very quickly, into back to being, okay, this is what it is, accept it, move forward, be aware of it, move forward, and do something different the next time.
Mine for sure has definitely been connection. For sure, that's been my favorite thing by far. I feel like the friendships I've created are a lot more meaningful. They're a lot more honest. They're a lot more genuine to me. They're people that I can definitively see me staying around or being around for as long as they'll have me there. That is by far the single greatest thing. I don't know that I've had a lot of friend groups at the ages like I'm some old man.
No, you've probably been on this earth a few times.
Well, yeah, hey. But through all my friends groups, and I still have 1 or 2 friends for sure that I still connect to, that I still connect with pretty deeply from the old friend groups, but for the most part, not really. They kind of let go of them all. But this time around, I would say pretty comfortably, I think the people that we have around us now, the vast majority of them, I'm really, really hoping that they stick around till the end, because I really enjoy their company.
Well, and we also have to be aware of, again, they are on their own journey. And I know only what I can do for myself and what I feel about myself. And that projection of how good I feel about myself has definitely helped others to come into this feeling. But then I can also see within our group, the areas in which they are at currently in their being and their life. And sometimes it scares me. A good example for me, another level of micro awareness, formally going out every week, was something that, I was doing all the time, and drugs was in relation to it. And just recently we had my birthday. Kyle's birthday was the other night, you know what I mean?
And then Vegas on today.
You were going to leave, for not be a part of the birthday celebration. So we went out the week before, and in my head I had planned for one night, And although I came out for Kyle, and I love Kyle, and we went to sushi and everything else, like, I couldn't participate in being out another night because of the fear or awareness and fear together, that I didn't want to slip back into that, and I couldn't emotionally handle it. Like I can't emotionally handle going out that many times. Not drugs be damned, whether that's going to happen or not. It's the action of doing it, and it's just something that I know that for me, I can't do it that consistently.
I would say, I mean, that's good. That's good on you to know that for sure. For me, it's more about as long as the environment, is relatively controlled. And I say that like very loosely, because a lot of the environments that I would put myself in, that were with people that I couldn't really be insecure around.
Yeah.
Without having potential really awful ramifications. So for me, it's just making sure that the group is steady, and then I can go out and do whatever I want. And
Well,
hopefully, you get to awareness comes with a level of control as well. I would imagine. For me, it did.
Yeah, and again, I know that we are different from the former environment that I was in, but again, in that environment, I watched the leader of that environment dictate everything that happened around it when it came to partying, when it came into those things, and me being the leader of our group, like I don't want to be the one that facilitates that repeating, because it sure as hell can and will if I decided to not be aware and decide to let it go. We have access to anything we could ever want. We now have a network that we can go do it whenever we want. I can go hang out with anybody at any time with people. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah. Well, we're trying to start that's what we do for a living.
Sure. Again, and even coming to the point where we're having a mastermind about certain topics that we want to be able to bring to the table that'll be different, but still within the constructs of what we're talking about right now, which is bringing people together to help each other, but then also we're doing it in an environment in which prior I had a negative connotation about, right? So it's maybe an interesting thing to do.
Maybe if you change the label of it, right? So instead of looking at it as we're going to go out and party, if you look at it, we're going to go out and work.
Well, I do see
that would help.
I do see the translatability between wanting to change the view on bodybuilding, for instance. I do, I want, a part of my mission as being a bodybuilding coach was changing the public's perception about bodybuilding. And that little statement is now changing almost into like partying and what it means to go out and have a gathering of people. I'm trying to change, we talked about it last night just a little bit, we could change the public perception of what it means to party. And we can do that through a level of what it does, positive feedback or positive interactions, positive things that it would do for the community.
Deeper connections between people, because sharing joy.
Exactly. So like there's so many good things about gatherings of people, and when they put it into a party stigma, sometimes we're like, oh, those are just party people, and it has a negative stigma. We could change that perception, and that is something that is translated, and again, connection just made in this conversation. About how we could do that. So it's just really cool to think about.
The teenagers and frat boys ruined it for all of us.
Yeah. Well,
were you one of those?
We are. I wasn't a frat boy at all.
Oh, really?
No, I wasn't a frat boy, man. I was on a team.
That's why I assumed.
Yeah, which is very similar. You all hang out with each other and stuff like that, but because we were on a sports team, an athletic team, we were held to a little bit higher standard when it came to partying, drugs. I got drug tested, stuff like that. So I couldn't actually be some of those frat boys. And we didn't have hazing. We could probably start having hazing into the Alpha Pump, and I think the hazing would be something like, oh, actually, no, I think the questions that we want to ask at the next mastermind would be, that's hazing. That's our version of hazing. And we just talked about, we basically created a frat, a fraternity.
So why not go ahead and have hazing?
I
love our hazing. Our hazing is questions like, what are you willing to sacrifice to get your goals? Hazed. Get rocked, son.
What's your ultimate vision?
Right.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool, man. We dived a little bit into micro-awareness, and I'd like to discuss now more about individually what our view of our individual awareness is. And I'm going to give you the floor first on that.
Yeah, so for me, it was the ability to be consistently objective about my behavior to the point of being able to actually shift it from one thing to another on my own. So like I said, I first learned how to do it through other people. I would do something, I would ask, hey, how did that leave you? What were the effects? That kind of things. And I would listen, and I would take, and I would control my behavior after that, or conform my behavior after that, I should say. Now, I can do it on my own. I can objectively look at myself. I can say something and I can be like, ooh, that didn't feel good. That didn't feel right. It's just as much emotional as it is intellectual, because you know when you're being disingenuous to who you are. So it's really just, put simply, it's the connection between your emotions and your head and finding the balance to being as true to yourself as you possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great, man. My level or definition of my own awareness definitely has to do with, changing the behavior. And I think if I were going to put it into one sentence, it's something that I harp on all the time: learning to align my intention with my actions, and realizing that my intuition is my guide. And every time I ever did something against my inner voice, it caused me pain. And that has allowed me to bring my inner voice and understanding what that is, instead of thinking that I have a devil and an angel on my shoulder with the old metaphorical sense. It was more so an ego and true self sense. And then realizing that the ego in the beginning, egotistical things, again, also has a negative connotation, but then coming into an awareness that your ego can definitely be used for good with the right intention behind the ego.
Absolutely. There's a good thing in pride.
Yeah. I mean, again, we talk about the difference between confidence and arrogance all the time, and there's a fine line for sure.
Intention.
And I do think intention is the difference. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that has been my statement, my mission statement for my own awareness. How to align your intention with your actions on a daily basis. And by being aware that that's what I wanted, again, it's fundamentally changed my actions and who I am. Hugging other people, men, whatever. That was not something, that was always something like internally that felt right. But I was afraid that people would judge me for being so open.
Being a man's man.
Yeah, well, exactly. The definition of a man had been ingrained into my head from not only my upbringing, but also former relationships. And also a fear of being judged as being gay. You know what I mean? Like, that's even out there. Like, what is this guy doing? And, it's just like all these different things that happened as well during the divorce that I went through, of all the different like rumblings that were in the background that have started to come into my being now, which my intuition told me that people would be saying some of these things that they were saying. I'm like, I already knew that,
Right.
But yeah, so I think that's my overall definition.
Well, I mean, I love that too, especially in the current environment, because I used to have the same thing, right? Like, I took dance, I was in theater, so I can definitely get where you're coming from, and that certainly used to bother me. And then I joined the military, and I've said this to you before, I'll say it again. The military is the largest group of straight gay men that you will ever meet in your entire life. I mean, there's definitely gay people in the military, and the guys, because you're so close, like, you're put in close quarters, you do a lot of suffering together, you develop this bond that is just very much bordering on very flirtatious between men in some cases. Yeah. My favorite argument to that now, though, is oh, you're gay. Okay, and?
Yeah.
What now?
Yeah. And I think social acceptances help, but also for you not responding to that in a sense of, because one, you know yourself so much that like, that is not at all, and then also knowing
awareness.
Yeah, awareness. Again, knowing that is something that can come from somebody who also is just insecure about their own
sexuality.
It's either sexuality or just insecure about what it means to be a man as well. And that would be the first thing that they would reach for, because that's all they have in their bag of tricks.
Right. How do you define manhood?
Yeah. So the other thing that we talked about, which is something that we share, and we kind of sat through, and I know that you haven't completely completed the thought of what we tried to talk about in these chairs off camera, right? But I want you to actually talk about, at least, do you want me to summarize first and then you go into it a little bit more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't, this is still really new for me, so yeah. I don't really have a direction, and a lot of, when you're dealing with anything emotion-based, finding the right words is like trying to solve like a Rubik's Cube that can fight back. We have such a limited vocabulary when it comes to the words that we use to describe our emotions, that I sit down and I really try to file through it, and I really don't have a baseline to work with that makes a lot of sense for me yet.
Yeah.
So I'm more than willing to have the conversation for sure, but it might sound a little convoluted, and there might be portions of it that don't make a lot of sense.
Well, and you talk about like how to describe your emotions, I always know that to be an internal thing. So prior to any sort of motivational speech that I'm going to give, or if I feel as if somebody that I'm about to interact with, based off of a planned meeting or something that needs a certain message, I actually imagine, I close my eyes and then I imagine myself shrinking into my heart. And then as I'm shrinking into my heart, or putting my life force, my brain and my life force into my heart, I just try and sit there quietly without any thought of what it's going to be or anything like that, but just kind of like feel like what it is I'm trying to display. And if the feeling is love, or if it's caring, or if it's whatever else, empathy, I try and get into that place and then start to think about where, coming from that place, what I could say.
And then what if it's so how I've always described my emotions before were metaphors, right? So I try to find the closest thing to how I felt in that moment some other time in my life, and then I describe the setting. So I have found that works relatively well. Like if I can give you an environment of what I've experiencing, that gives a pretty good credence to what I felt. Because a lot of people, our emotions are relatively similar in certain environments.
Sure.
That said, I don't know what this. I've never felt this before, so I have no reference point, right? So I can sit there and I can even perform that same visualization, but it makes no difference. I felt love before, right? I felt caring. I felt the wide breadth of all the different emotions that you could classify with the common words and all that jazz, and this is none of them.
Well, let's talk through this now, because now we're talking through it. So I'll actually end with the summary. I think the feeling that you are going for is destiny. I think that is what you have. Have you ever felt destined prior to this to do anything?
Destined. I would say probably not. No.
So
that's a good starting point.
Maybe that's where we're at, because I think what we talked through was a sense of being here for a reason.
Have you?
And knowing for a reason. Felt destiny before? Towards the wrong outcomes, yes, I have.
And how did it feel?
Real. Very real. But...
No, so what were the physiological, like, where did you feel it?
Well, I share something based off of listening to Gary Vee that I think he doesn't know how to describe either, but I get chills, and I don't get chills on my body. I get chills that start at the back of my spine. They go up my head, and they almost electricity like raises through my head. And that has been an intuitive signal, or a signal from the universe is what I've described it as. I have said it multiple times, and when I say something inspirational or something like that, it definitely hits when I say something inspirational. And I think it is the crown chakra, and feeling that what I've said to that person they've connected with and identified with. But also my thought process when I think about something, it happens too. And I know that when that happens, that this is something that I should either verbalize into the world, or if it's an idea that I should run with. And again, long term of my view of intuition now is that intuitively it's guiding you down a path, and it's not an immediate path. Like, this intuition is getting you to a point where, in your life that you should be, and it's guiding you on this path. But the immediate result isn't always going to be a positive result by following your intuition, especially if you got to break down and get rid of all of your shit before. That's going to be a painful experience, and that's what it was for me. It was like, intuitively, this is what I need to do. So I have felt that feeling of this is right, and I've envisioned something happening in the future that did happen, even with my former relationship. What I envisioned and what we envisioned together in the beginning manifested and happened. So destiny happened, right? Is destiny, in a sense, some people think I'm destined to do this for the rest of my life. I think the feeling of destiny is knowing that you are on a track and you're getting to some place, and you feel as if it's destined to happen, but that experience is the thing that's destined. So that is my definition of destiny, and feeling destiny before. But I would say the difference with the feeling of destiny that I have now is that I feel that no matter what challenges or obstacles come in the way of me and you, and with what we're trying to do together, that we will overcome and continue.
Well, absolutely.
And
There's no give in either of us. So.
no, but before, obviously, when the destined thing happened in my life, the difference is that it normally ended with an abrupt stop after that, and a reset and start all over and manifest something new, you know.
Right.
And in this sense, the only difference is it feels the same, but it doesn't have an end to it.
So you're thinking this one will be the rest of the life one. This is the rest of the life destiny.
Yeah, the feeling, and I think I'm chasing not only experiences, but I'm definitely chasing a feeling, and the feeling continues to happen as we progress in small places. You know, like this is right, this is right, this is right, this is right. And even when there's, you know, we've had plenty of challenges this past week with some of the things, new things that we're trying to do that are very frustrating, and even more so taking back into the whole view of like, all right, this is done, right? And then
still have
continuing,
yeah.
And then it still is a problem in different ways that we haven't anticipated, has given me an awareness of like saying something is done is what's causing you this pain and anxiety, right?
So not meaning reality.
Exactly. So now it's like, all right, I have to remember that just because intuitively this is telling me this is going to work, it doesn't mean that it's working immediately. Like we have to continue to work at it. So that's the longevity view of what's happening.
So I can tell you for me that everything that you described, not at all what I'm experiencing in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
And I understand that people experience emotions in very different places and very different things. I do get chills, but it's usually not based around an emotion. It's usually when I feel inspired or something like that. This is a I imagine like a mass in the center of your chest, and usually when I feel I notice it when it's still or calm, and I notice it extremely if I'm in a negative emotion, put that in quotations, because or an emotion that lowers your energy vibration. That's a much better way to look at it. That's when it becomes the most apparent for me, because it doesn't move through my whole, I used to, when I would get angry or frustrated, it would be an all-encompassing thing, right? It's quick in, quick out. That's usually how my emotions come in. It all-encompassed, like when I get angry, I'm angry and then I'm not anymore. And it would be from head to toe. And now there's this space in the center of my being that no matter what I'm feeling is untethered. And it's getting to the point, I'm hoping, my goal here with this is to try to get to a point where I can control even my initial reactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's by far the most challenging thing, because you have to be like on an even keel all the time, ready for anything to happen and prepared to handle it. That's the goal for me. With this, I'm not entirely sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because joy doesn't even penetrate it. Nothing.
It's invincible.
It's like a force field that sits in the center of me, and it's not uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt. It's just, actually, something does penetrate. It's serene. That is, and we were talking about that earlier, it's like how you feel, how I feel. I'm not going to speak to everyone else's emotions, but when I watch any kind of beautiful natural phenomenon, right? So when I saw the green, the Northern Lights in Washington, or sitting on the beach watching waves roll in, it's just a quiet sense of serene, and it's not always there, but since my show has been consistently showing up more and more often.
Yeah. And I've talked about that recently too, being invincible, and I think that it also has to do with, for me, I was framing it in a sense of vulnerability. Like, you know, again, I'm dating this new girl that I care about, and during the beginning stages, I was very honest and upfront about everything. And then when people were on the outside were telling her things about me, she had already heard it. I was like, that made me invincible, impervious to anything, because I have nothing to hide, right? So I think, again, just thinking about how that might be translatable in the same feeling, is that you, during this process of awareness and coming to this, you became vulnerable. You let people know about certain things. You certainly have talked to me about things that you wouldn't hash to most people. And by doing that, it released your baggage, right? And it started to make you separate or disassociate, yourself from your former self, which is a part of awareness. We can start talking about who you once were, and when you can really start talking about the things that brought you incredible shame prior, and you can verbalize it to maybe even one help somebody. And actually, if you're verbalizing something like this, you're always helping somebody. Even if they don't become vulnerable immediately, they will admire the vulnerability, and then eventually that effect will have a butterfly or ripple effect on them later in their life. So I feel invincible as well, and I feel invincible because I have gotten rid of the baggage that I carried in my former self.
Well, the phrase I would use to describe it isn't, because I used to have like a sense of invincibility. That's how I identified with mine. Like when you're a kid and I can do all these awful things and everything's always going to be okay, regardless of the actual situation that you have accrued around yourself. This is more of like a general understanding that no matter what happens, because of everything, I guess everything that I've been through, I have to imagine that's where it stems from, right? My past.
Yeah.
Because whatever you think on is the emotions that you're going to create. So I have to imagine that it is just a general sense of understanding that no matter how bad it gets, I'll find a way out of it.
Yeah.
So everything's going to be okay.
And I think you didn't feel that way until you became more self-aware.
Yeah, no, this, like I said, this is, I mean, when was my show? Like 3 months ago?
No.
I'm so bad with time.
It was like 6 weeks ago.
Oh, was it really? It was that recent?
It wasn't that long, man. It was like August 10th.
Man, that seems like so soon.
Actually, it was like 4 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No shit. 3 months, 4 weeks.
Time is relative when you're having
Hey, amen to that. So, no, that was the first time that I noticed it, stepping on stage.
Yeah.
Because I was so full of adrenaline and everything, and there was this very small, and it's grown since, but there's this very small piece of me that was just very still.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've gone over, and actually the car, that was, I could feel it expand. That's what all that was when I was meditating and all that stuff on the car on the way to one I can't remember the name of the show,
yeah.
But we were sitting in the back of the car and I meditated and I started crying twice.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And each time it was like I could feel it, like, and now it's like the size of a, I don't know, quarter. I don't know.
Yeah.
Spherically shaped. In the
Yeah,
middle
there's
of
not a
my
lot of
body.
people that can verbalize that, but I mean, you are looking at your heart chakra. I mean, in that area, and that was something that I had to clear for self-love. Save that for another time. What I do want to end with for this issue is our shared view of a macro level of awareness. That we both believe. We both came from different past experiences. Some, again, I'm not going to compare the depth of the pain, but if I do know one thing, the feeling of pain is the same no matter what causes it. And I definitely was more internally detrimental to my own self, and you had a lot of external things that happened in your past that caused pain. And what we both have realized is that it all had to happen to come to a certain point. So every shameful thing that you've done, I'm talking about shame right now, and I have flashes of things that I have done to myself that I would sit there and just stew on. And I realize now with this sense of awareness that it had to happen for me to be me. And even more so now that we sit in this area, that we both feel as if we're destined for something greater. And if I were going to verbalize that something, it is a
Helping.
insatiable desire, right, to help other people, and also to see our own vision for our own life be fulfilled, in before we never thought that could happen in our former being, in our former state. So this is what has brought us to acceptance and awareness all the way through these steps. Again, I put words to these steps, this process, this transformational process of Alpha Squared, which actually morphed through us talking about this, because it was not Alpha Squared before this. It was just the Alpha steps of transformation, which is why I learn so much every time I sit down with you. About myself, about you.
Ditto, man.
And I want anybody that's listening to be able to conceptualize and visualize what this process could do for you and what it could start breaking down, especially if you have thoughts like, I will never be, I will always be this certain way. Those are all thoughts of your brain rationalizing based off your past experiences, which you either didn't have control of or you were influenced to do. And if you can start to bring at least a small level of awareness, and this is more awaken to this thought, that could be the spiral, and a good spiral that spins you into out of the current environment and life and emotional state that you're in right now into self-belief, self-love, and how we feel about our lives. Because the other thing that I would say is that our definition of success has also been changed through this process. Do I want to make money? Yes, you have to live in this world. Do I want to make more so I can impact more people? Yes, that is my exact reason for it. If we never end up making a certain amount of money, I'm still happy. And
that's not the goal. Money's a tool, not the end.
Exactly. And that is another shift that I think would help people through this process as well. So we want you to find your own happiness. We want you to find yourself. And we also want you to realize that there's more to this world than what you've been told it is.
And I would like to say that if you are at the worst part in your life, if you're at the lowest place that you could possibly be, just remember, when you write your book, it'll be the best part.
That's a good way to end it. That's good. We're done.
We did it.
You ended it this time. Look at how fast you ended it.